the move that for me has thus far been the Western blockbuster trade of the offseason is Zven and Mithy, Zven formerly known as Niels, the bot lane of OG Origin, moving over to the team they lost to in the final of the ULCS spring split, G2, formerly called Gamers 2. So, whenever I break down roster moves like this, I always think it's like a new formula I came up with late last year, that the best way to do it is you initially have to look at the people removed and question should they be removed. Then you look at the people they're adding, ask the merit of that, and then you ultimately consider the overall implications of the move itself. So you break it into smaller components. Because, for example, sometimes a player is playing poorly and should be removed, but the player they bring in to replace him maybe actually isn't an upgrade, maybe doesn't fix the problem. You know, these sorts of scenarios can happen, so it's better to break it down that way. So let's start with that. Let's start with G2, removing Emperor and Hybrid, essentially to make space for these two players, Zven and mithy. So, first and foremost, Emperor as a player is the primary player that they're removing, really, here, if we're thinking about this. Because ultimately, Zven and mithy presumably came as a package deal. So the real player you're removing to upgrade is Zven. Now, Hybrid was good, therefore I think he has to just be removed, just simply because Mithy's coming as well, and it has to go that way. So in terms of Emperor as a player, the spark to make this move, I think, as well as obviously Zven and them wanting to come, is that Emperor was good, but he wasn't godlike. Like, the main players of that team that were the stars of G2 were quite clearly Perkz, and then Perkz his play emphasized by how strong the jungling of Trick was, especially in terms of just pure ganking and early on in the game. So those two were really the star players. The way that their game went is the way that G2 went as a team. Emperor was a good player. He was a solid player. He was above average as an AD carry in ULCS, but he was by no means a star, and he was not someone you had to keep a hold of. When you also consider that he's Korean and presumably doesn't have great English, I also think that's a very good reason to remove him in this case when you're getting an upgrade and you're getting a player who then be able to speak good English and have better communication. I think that certainly helps. Sure, Emperor could talk to Trick, but that's not the same as talking to the rest of the team. And also, it's not the same as having a very good synergy in terms of communication with your support, because his support, obviously, I think it's from the Netherlands, right, Hybrid? Could be wrong on that, I can't remember. So, in terms of Hybrid as a player, Hybrid was good. He's better relative to his position than Emperor was an AD carry. Like, I thought he was up there with the top supports in Europe, but the thing is, for me, he hadn't quite made it, because again, he's not one of the primary stars of the team. He's just a good player. Also, his champion pool wasn't massive. It was like reasonably small for most of the split. He didn't get pushed off champs very often. He played one split essentially and did well. So for me, still not entirely proven. Like, done good so far. If we're talking about the initial split, good high marks. Definitely looking to see more, a lot of potential for growth, certainly. But we had a lot of players who come into ULCS and have a good split, and if they're not a star especially, perform well and look good. But first of all, what's great here is we're going to get to see him in a totally different team environment. So let's see if he shows himself to be very good there. That's another bonus point towards him. It's a second split. Let's see how he performs in his second split. That's another scenario. The meta is changing in terms of the sports that you're going to play. So let's see how that works out overall. He's got the chance to prove himself as a very good player now in Origin and going forwards as a player. But I think it's certainly fine to upgrade him with mithy, which might not be in the initial intention. If you could have only taken Niels/Zven, maybe you would have done that. But I think that taking mithy as well, put it this way, it's a bonus, and I actually think it's an upgrade as well. So in terms of Zven and mithy, if these are the two players to recruit, yes, absolutely. Because for me, these two players were actually, even when the team was not doing that well, I still looked at these two players and said, these two are not the reason Origin is looking so shaky in the split. These two are still players who are at worst top 3 at their positions in Europe, individually. I mean, these were, some of them probably top 2, and some people would argue that Zven was the best at times as the AD carry. Now, I would say one of the great things about this lineup as well is, individually they were top 2, top 3 at their roles. So then as a bot lane, they were the best bot lane in Europe. In fact, I'd say they were the best Western bot lane. I don't really give a fuck what anyone thinks about Immortals or TSM. Don't care. This was the best Western bot lane, even when the team was doing shaky and bad. Because part of the reason why the team wasn't bottom of the ULCS when they were doing poorly is because of this fucking bot lane. Otherwise, they would have been bottom of the LCS. They would have been like 9th place or something. But instead, this bot lane at least carried them to win some of their games, to win like 50% of the games or whatever, and to have a chance to be pretty decent for most of this. And then when the other players came around and started to play well, Soaz, etc., then finally, and Power of Evil got his shit together. Then you had the foundation in place that put them up again to being an elite level team, and they had the playoff run. They did very well. So first of all, Zven, what was great about this split and what I saw at Worlds from this guy, actually, I thought he was good. I thought he was more comparable to that Emperor point I made earlier, where he was good, above average, like doing pretty well, but wasn't some monster star carry in the old Origin. He was a good player, but it was only in certain games and with certain champions I thought he carried in 2015. Then going into Worlds, though, from ELCS, then I thought at Worlds he did play some real hard carry games. Particularly I remember the Flash Wolves series in the quarterfinals. This is where he played like a man. And what I loved here was he showed me here that he wasn't just going to settle into being a Reckless to the SOAS and Expeke of Fnatic, but in Origin now, and just be like the third star, but like doesn't have to carry very often and just plays a safe game and just contributes and then gets carried to some degree in terms of star power, but then people want to call you a star. This guy went out there and he put people on his back, and he was the guy where he just carried a whole game, and he was willing to output massive damage and to take risks and to play like the game was on his back, because they needed him in some of those games. They needed his strengths because Maple was kicking the shot of Expeke, SOAS was like so-so with Stake amazingly, and obviously Castle was getting the early game jungling going. So they needed him in that series, and he was a big reason as to why they were able to win, despite the fact Flash Wolves had a lot of advantages in that series. So for me, that's when he really showed like this potential, and then he's delivered on it this split. When Origin was bad, he was straight. He was the primary. He was almost the only carry at times in that particular team. He was doing some real hard carry shit. I will say his champion pool wasn't always super diverse, 'cause it never had to be. Also, you weren't going to ban him off some of the things he was on. But I thought he was good overall, and he was strong. I certainly think you could make a case that Vigim was the better AD carry, and the more well-rounded AD carry and had the better impact for his team. I would make that case myself, and I think it can be made, but I think he was right up with them. And when I consider that personally, I think Zven had a worse team than Forgiven, both in terms of individual players and the role balance within the team and the overall like style that they played. Yeah, H2K wasn't good in the playoffs, but we're talking just teams here, not just looking at the playoff performances, just on paper, the rosters. I think Zven had less to work with, and so I'm very impressed in that sense, that he was able to be a hard carry. I also get the sense that both of these players, Zven and mithy, are very dedicated players, and that's a great sign, and they're both players who are still very hungry for success. Zven obviously hasn't had very much, he's still a new player, and mithy had that kind of part of his career stolen from him, so he wants to get part of that back. He wants to get a chance to be an elite level player and pick up from where he was from the Lemon Dogs era when he got stuck in Challenger Window and then got banned. Now, mithy is a fantastic support player. What's great is he's like an Afromu in some sense, because he's always had this quality of being a fantastic regular season support. And then, yeah, in Lemon Dogs he had the great playoff run, but then Worlds was a bit lackluster. And then after that, his NIP teams could never get back into LCS. So this is a guy where he's always had this talent to be one of the best, and now he's been able to deliver on it from 2015 onwards. And he's been fantastic. I think he's an amazing player. Sick in lane. He's sick at a number of different champions. He has a shot calling component. He always synergizes. He always synergizes fantastically with his AD carries. Think how many different AD carries this guy's had, and he makes them all better when they play with him than when they play elsewhere. What a fantastic player. I think he'll always been one of my favourites. I'm very glad to see he has developed that final component of becoming this good player in playoff situations, not choking, not tilting, not having any of these issues that he had before. Now he's one of the core components you can rely upon. And that's what's made this bot lane fantastic. You had this young potential who was getting crafted and developed. Mithy's also played that role as well. He's only trained Tabs to be a good AD carry, trained Freeze to be a good AD carry. Now he's trained Zven. So what a fantastic player he's been. What a great teacher. What a great synergy in terms of his bot lanes. So this is an upgrade at the bot lane position. Also, I think it can't be underestimated, and people haven't really thought this through, that this is literally moving an entire bot lane to a team. Think how rarely that's ever happened. Like, it'd be one thing if you just moved Zven. I'd say, yeah, it's going to be a good move and he should be an upgrade, but I wouldn't be quite sure how would he work with Hybrid. If you were just moving mithy, okay, Emperor's a good player, but was Hybrid some special player for him? He used to play with Lost Boy in the past. How will mithy compare to those players and the way they need to play around? You're just moving the entire synergy. I mean, the bot lane plays together the most anyway, so you're just moving that entire synergy into a new team. I feel like that is a great move, and that is it's a lot more reliable indicator, I think, of potential success in the future. So I think it's not the same as them individually joining a team separately. The fact that they're both joining and they're joining together and in a role they're going to play together still, I think is really good and makes this very distinct from other roster moves we had in the past. I also think the fact that mithy does bring a semi-shot calling component, it should be good for G2. That should be able to help them out in that particular respect. I think overall this makes G2 stronger. I already thought they were a very good team, but I thought they got helped out by the fact that you had the guys from H2K inexplicably collapse and not get to the final, not play as well as they had in the split. I thought it would have been a great battle between the two of them if they'd both been able to play at the regular season form, which for whatever reason HK wasn't. I don't think that G2 were the clear-cut best team in Europe. I think they were the best by a little bit of a margin, and they had some fantastic performances by people like Trick, and obviously Perks was the star for me, the MVP. That helped them win, but it wasn't so far ahead of the others. They weren't that far ahead of the Veterans of Origin, they weren't that far ahead of H2K. So overall, I think this makes them stronger. This puts them in a position where they should be the number one team for me. Also, I think this move makes them less one-dimensional. One of the great things when I think of all the teams Mithy has played on, the different styles they play, I think this means now that this team can play almost any style. They can do 1-3-1. They can have team fight. They can play almost any type of scenario here that they want to. So they should just find the most effective one for them, their comps and how the players want to play, and just hammer that. Because they can change it up when they need to. They're not just going to be entirely countered by a different meta shift, I don't think. I also think as a little bonus, this opens up in future the potential, because you got a foreign spot available again, to maybe one day get a Korean top laner, or to get even a foreign top laner, wherever that might be from, and potentially upgrade that position. So that's interesting in and of itself, and gives you more upgrade potential in the future if all these moves work. Now, in terms of the players themselves, I also think in the context of their career, for Mithy, this is great. I mean, he already was at a position where he's in a very good team. He'd obviously been in an LCS final, 2 of them now in a row. He went to Worlds. He's already at a good level, but this gives him a chance to be a champion in LCS. This gives him a chance to potentially be like a Fnatic and go really deep at Worlds, but entirely legit. Like, I think getting Flash Wars was this insanely, fortuitous event for Origin when you consider the other people they could have gotten. So, to me, this is more like you could be the best Western team, which Origin obviously wasn't. In terms of Zven, I can totally get this move. To me, this is like a Reckless scenario, where he's the young guy who's developed into a potential star. He's got his skills all in place. He's working incredibly hard. He sees other members of the team not working as hard. Other members of the team who are very good, they're veterans, they always come around, but they're not putting in 100%, and therefore he's always wondering, what would happen if they put in 100%? What if I go and join a team with other people as hungry as me in this scenario? So it reminds me of the Reckless Alliance scenario. Because remember, what happened was, Alliance won the summer split, Fnatic came second. Fnatic's player who was putting in all the dedication, all the effort, was Reckless. Meanwhile, the other players, they knew they'd make the playoffs. They figured they could make the final. They figured they could qualify for Worlds. So maybe they weren't putting in all that effort. So if you're Reckless, you look over at Alliance and go, fuck, those are the guys who are dedicated. Those are the guys who want to win. I'm at a similar level to them, but if I join them, maybe we become the super team. Maybe we become even better. And one thing people don't know, and this is very important context for this Zven situation and how people are hating on Zven, is that not only did Reckless leave because, Expect K and so ours weren't practicing it up. So a similar scenario to a degree, or they weren't working as hard as him, might be the better way to phrase it. But also, they were having discussions for Reckless to join Alliance before Fnatic even went to Worlds. So Fnatic played that whole Worlds campaign with that in the background. That is something that was a potential for Fnatic to happen. So people bringing up that, Zven and them must have already had the discussion before MSI. Okay, same scenario here. So don't be such hypocrites if you're going to judge the people differently for the same thing, basically. Now, I feel like the big issue of contention with this move is that people are getting way too blinded by the results of the split. Let's be real. Just as TSM in NALCS Spring Split were not the second best team for the whole split, they were terrible for the last 4 weeks and had a lot of problems, and picked it up as the playoffs went and got help from meta shifts and key underperformances from certain players on other teams. Likewise, Origin was mediocre for most of the spring split. Part of the reason they were probably mediocre, they didn't have proper coaching structure, they weren't working as hard as some of the other teams, they didn't seem to take it as seriously and be as engaged with it, thinking we can get it together towards the end of the split, we can get it towards the playoffs, we can do what we need to do at that point in time. Meanwhile, if guys, I'm speculating here, guys like Zven and Mithy are working very hard, they're dedicated, they're diligent, they're trying to be the best they can be at their role, they're trying to develop their skills and get 100% out of their potential. In that scenario, if I look over and I'm them, and I see that my team, they got it together, but they still didn't win, and we still didn't necessarily get 100% out of the team, and we were good, but we weren't the champions, and I look over at G2, like the Alliance scenario with Reckless, and I see that they're more dedicated, they're more hungry, they did win, I want to be part of that, I deserve that spot, I'm better than Emperor, why aren't I on that team? And I see Perks over there, the best player in the league, and he's a young guy as well, and he's putting in a lot of work, and he's hungry for more than just winning ULCS. He wants to have a chance to win internationally. I'm someone like Zven. I want to fucking partner with that guy. Same reason why Reckless wanted to partner with Froggen. The best player in Europe, arguably the best Western player at the time, a guy who was working incredibly hard, who was in the best team, who had the team built around him. Why don't me and you partner up instead of battling each other and take over this whole fucking league? Why don't we have some LeBron, Dwayne Wade type shit going on? So, I think overall people have been too blinded by like thinking, well, Origin was the second best team and they were right close there. No, they only were in the playoffs and on that 2-week span or something. They didn't prove it over the whole split, and a lot of questions could still be asked about them and what would happen in the summer split. Would they chill out again? Would they only start to get it together towards the end? I can totally understand this move from Zven and mithy. Now you can add in the amazing element, which is, should they have been talking about things privately behind the scenes? Should they have at least brought it up to their teammates? That's a possibility, and I'm at least thinking about it. Should they have been a bit more honourable in that sense and not let their teammates find out by Reddit? Sure, these are all things you can definitely discuss and debate. We don't know the specifics of it. We've only had things alluded to, and Amazing giving his side of things. We haven't heard the facts of it. But if that's the case, I can certainly understand Amazing being upset and some of the Origin players being upset, but I don't think the actual move itself should be criticised along the same lines. You've got to take the facts and interpretations of the facts and separate them out. So I think overall, great move overall for them.